All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. We are continuing our discussion on faith and trust in God. Letter number 9, in good hands. And off we go. By the grace of God, 22 ER 5711-1951, Brooklyn. Greetings and blessings. In response to the Pidyon Nefesh that you sent me, and again, recall Pidyon Nefesh is the letter that one writes to a Rebbe, to a Hasidic master. Pidyon Nefesh literally means redemption of the soul. And the idea is that in giving this letter and an act of charity, a charitable contribution, that the Rebbe intercedes on behalf of the individual to redeem their soul spiritually and materially from any challenges that they face. So in response to the Pidyon Nefesh that you sent me, when I visited the holy resting place of my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe Rayatz, I mentioned your name in connection with your needs. He no doubt intercedes and arouses divine compassion upon yourself and your wife, that you enjoy robust health with peace of mind and body, particularly since, as you write, you have a letter from him with his holy blessing that you settle into a good life. So the first thing the Rebbe says is, number one, I've prayed on your behalf, and therefore, spiritually, the Rebbe in heaven will do what his job is, to act as an interceder and to plead before God for you and your wife. And that you will be fulfilled with those blessings, because not only is he going to pray for you now, but you already have a letter from him where he offered that blessing, and therefore that blessing continues on. You write that you suffer from an ailment, though without saying what it is, and that at any moment you are likely to undergo a serious heart attack, etc., God forbid. Okay, so this individual is writing to the Rebbe that they have a serious ailment. They don't articulate what the ailment is, but also express this concern for a serious heart attack. So the Rebbe says, it appears to me that this is not the case, and that, begging your pardon, this is an extreme exaggeration. I'll say this in not so sensitive language. First of all, calm down. All right? Just chill out. It's not that serious. Number one. Number two, you write further that a partition of iron is separating you from your Father in heaven, and that your prayers and charitable contributions have had no effect, and so on. So the individual is saying that they feel that there is a spiritual barrier separating them from our Father in heaven, and that there's nothing that they can do to break through this barrier. So the Rebbe continues, and he says like this: without a doubt, you yourself also understand that all this is no more than fantasies. Why? For even if there were a partition of iron, the sages assure us in plain words that even a partition of iron cannot separate the children of Israel from their Father in heaven. So I would say, first of all, that the reason that the writer of the letter to the Rebbe used the expression of partition of iron, which in Hebrew is mechitza shel barzel, is because they were playing on the traditional language that even a mechitza of barzel, even a partition of iron, cannot separate us from our Father in heaven. So the Rebbe is taking the teaching of our sages as the starting point, and if that's the fact, then it can be that you actually have a partition of iron separating you. In other words, the writer is saying, I have this partition, and the Rebbe is saying it's not possible because our sages say that a partition of iron cannot separate between us and our Father in heaven. So that's point number one. Point number two, the same applies to what you write about, how your prayers, and especially the tzedakah you distribute, have had no effect. So as we read above, Rebbe writes, and that your prayers and charitable contributions had no effect, and so on. The Rebbe says that's not possible. Why? In the Rebbe's gently humorous way, he writes, I saw in a little book, it's called the Tanakh. Tanakh is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. The Torah, the prophets, and the scriptures, where it is written in Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, that the Holy One, blessed be He, says, test me please in this. What is God asking us to test Him in? In the mitzvah of tzedakah. God is asking us to test Him in the mitzvah of tzedakah. that if only people will give tzedakah, I will pour down blessings upon you, and so on. For the most part, we are not to test God. It's just not the nature of our relationship. But when it comes to tzedakah, God specifically says, this is one area where you can test me. Test me that you will give tzedakah in abundance, you'll give tzedakah beyond your means, and that I will guarantee you that I will pour down blessings upon you because you've tested me in this particular area. So again, the Rebbe is saying to this individual, it's not possible that the tzedakah have had no effect, because God himself articulates, please test me and I will pour down blessings upon you. The same applies to prayer, as is explained in many sources in the teachings of the sages, that prayer works and we just need to do it. So it begs the question, if this individual is experiencing this notion of there's this barrier of iron that separates, and that their efforts have not broken it down. So, and the Rebbe is saying, but the truth of Torah stands, and therefore it's not possible that that there's a barrier between you and God. And it's not possible that the efforts that you've made to bring down that barrier are not working. So then why is this person in such a dark place? How are they to get out of this? So for that, the Rebbe continues, and he says as follows. Above all, as is clarified in the works of Chassidus, this is one of the counsels by means of which the evil inclination topples a man into melancholy. And if melancholy stemming from spiritual reasons gives good cause for vigilance, how much more wary must one be of melancholy that comes from some other source, for there is nothing worse than that. So it's very powerful and very important, and I believe very relevant application that we can all take in our lives. Sometimes we're not feeling that good about ourselves. We're not in a good mood. And what we do is we turn towards notions of spiritual deficiency in ourselves to draw a conclusion that the reason that I'm feeling this way is because I'm disconnected. Now, at first glance, that might sound very noble, very holy, very spiritual. Look at you, you're such a self-reflective person that when things are not going right, you recognize that you're spiritually deficient. Well, that's only true when it's true. Meaning, it's only true that if the outcome of what your experience is directly related to your spiritual deficiency, then that would be a very noble thing. But if it's not true, then this is a false humility. And what the Rebbe is saying is, maybe you do have spiritual deficiencies, but the fact that you're coming to a conclusion that because you have spiritual deficiencies, that therefore God is disconnected from you, or that you can't break through that barrier, that's just not true. And if you're feeling that way, it's coming from an unholy place. It's coming from the evil inclination, because the evil inclination has a strategy. The evil inclination strategy is get us into a bad mood. And when we're in a bad mood, that actually leads us to more disconnect from God. Because if we don't feel good about ourselves, if we're feeling spiritually deficient, then that pushes us not to rise above it. It pushes us into a state of melancholy. And when we're in a state of melancholy, we feel worthless. And when we feel worthless, we actually then go ahead and engage in more worthless kind of activities. So the Rebbe is in the second half of that paragraph that if melancholy stemming from spiritual reasons should give cause for vigilance, in other words, we need to really discern whether this is coming from a holy place or an unholy place. So surely if it's coming from other sources, such as physical ailment in this case, that this is really not a good thing. So what should you do? You should insistently fortify your trust in what even the most light-minded of Jews believe, that the Holy One, blessed be He, is not only the creator of the world, but that He also conducts it. And not only long ago, but also presently, every day and at every hour. So the first thing is strengthen your trust in God. Fortify your trust in God. And what is your trust in God? Number one, that He is the creator of the world. Number two, that He conducts the world. Number three, that He conducts the world not only in the past, but He conducts the world presently, every day, and at every hour. God's very real. He's very active. He's present in your experience. Moreover, He conducts not only the big world, but also the affairs of the microcosm, man, and He is the ultimate good. Two very critical points here. Number one, that God is actively involved in the conducting of the world. In other words, you might say that God creates the world, but he's not involved in the day-to-day going-ons. The answer is no. God is involved and he conducts the affairs of everything, including the human being, number one. Number two, God is the ultimate good. And if God is good, then what God does is good. God doesn't do bad. So if God is good, he does good. And therefore, what you're experiencing as negativity, you're mistaken about it. It's not negativity. It's not bad. It's just that maybe you don't necessarily have the ability to see it. But let's start with the facts. And the facts are that God is involved, God is conducting the world, and God is good. And therefore, what you're experiencing must be good. Without a doubt, when you fortify your trust in the above, what we just read in the last 8-9 lines, you will then finally see, even with fleshy eyes, that everything will be for the best, even in the kind of good that is manifest. In other words, not only for the best that only an angel can see or that God can see, but that even your physical person can see, and that one can recognize that the thing itself is good, not just that it is for the good. For this, however, one must strengthen one's bond of iskashrus with the God of life by setting aside times to study the Torah of life, by serving him through the avoda of prayer, through which you are benevolent toward your soul of life, and by fortifying your observance of the mitzvos and of the comprehensive mitzvah of tzedakah, for the truth of tzedakah is for life. So this last point is really, really powerful and very important. And that is that oftentimes we think that the shift in our attitude is simply accomplished by reading something nice, reading a nice sermon, and being inspired. It doesn't work that way. That works very temporarily, right? Those are like firecrackers. They go off. You get a nice light, and then it goes out. You can get inspired very quickly, but it's not sustainable. For it to be sustainable, that we should see God's presence in our lives, that we should see the challenges in our lives as blessing, to see the goodness in it, one must invest themselves in that relationship with God to bring that consciousness of God into a greater awareness within our lives. And that is through Torah study, through prayer, strengthening our observance of mitzvahs, and in particular the mitzvah of tzedakah, the act of giving to others. And the Rebbe concludes, I hope that in the near future you will let me know of an improvement in your material situation, and likewise of an improvement in your spiritual situation. What does the Rebbe mean in this context of the spiritual situation? Namely, the disappearance of thoughts about a separating partition. In other words, the spiritual decline is not about your spiritual decline. The spiritual decline is you have this notion that you are disconnected from God. That's where the spiritual decline actually begins from. If we correct that spiritual decline, then we're going to be in a much better place. And that you will make strenuous endeavors to fulfill the command of the Holy One, blessed be he, which is to serve God with joy. The Rebbe concludes, enclosed is a copy of the Sikha, the talk of Lag BaOmer that was recently published. You should ponder over it deeply and in anticipation of glad tidings, the Rebbe's signature. That's a powerful letter. I think we can all identify. Any questions that anybody would like to offer up, I am here to listen. And those of you that are watching on YouTube, if you want to put something in the chat, you're welcome to do so as well.
Very motivating. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. It lands well, hopefully, and we can all apply it in our lives in a very real way. And I wish everybody a good Shabbos and an upbeat, positive weekend. All the best.